the United States, a FEMA certified instructor, where I teach 7 different weather hazard related classes to emergency managers, first responders, hospitals, schools, and other professionals. So I entered the Emmys and I got nominated in the weather anchor category. There were 4 of us nominated. I was the only female, which I was honored to right here in the United States. And the hurricanes, it's been a very active season. It's scary because as the climate continues to change, extreme weather events, financial preparation can be tough. Because a lot of us sometimes are living paycheck to paycheck and we don't have that safety net. And this is where you have to maybe give up things that I don't like talking about it either. But it's one of those things where at some point you're gonna have to talk about it. Yes, insurance is critical when it comes to natural disasters. Home insurance, renter's insurance, you gotta do it. You gotta have it. And then it's huge to have that mindset for personal growth. Gosh, to be prepared and be ready for anything. I think it goes back to not being reactive in events that are unforeseen or disasters, which in the US, we get so many tornadoes because you have cold, dry air coming in from Canada, warm, moist air coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. When they clash, that is that breeding ground for all those ingredients to come together to get.
Cheryl is a weather reporter and a presenter on national television in the United States of America. She is an Emmy-nominated weather reporter. In her personal business, she works with individuals and businesses that help people with natural disasters. Let's chat to Cheryl to find out more about her world and her experiences with weather. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome to Inner Habit. How are you?
Hi, Shruti. Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad we met. I'm so glad you added me to your Instagram. And we met in April 2024, which was just a few months ago. I had no clue whatsoever that you were somebody influential in the United States, and I will explain it to individuals, what you do. So just a way of introduction, you are an Emmy-nominated weather reporter. You have your own business where you teach individuals to be prepared and travel safe, essentially, which is called Prepare with Share. Is there anything else you think that our audience should know?
Yes, I'm also a FEMA, which stands for the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the United States, a FEMA certified instructor, where I teach 7 different weather hazard related classes to emergency managers, first responders, hospitals, schools, and other professionals all across the United States and its territories. So I've got a lot. My degree is in meteorology, and I've kind of bounced around to different things over the past 20 years.
That's right. Now, Cheryl, tell me about your life, firstly. Did you always want to be in the, a weather girl, as we call it out here, or a weather reporter?
It's so funny that you would say that because out here, if you say weather girl, a lot of people get mad and they say, we're degreed meteorologists. And no, you're fine, because I roll with it. I go with whatever. But I knew at 9 years old that I wanted to be a broadcast meteorologist. I was really obsessed with snow. And I grew up in Connecticut, which is in the northeastern part of the United States. And we got a significant amount of snow there. Now, when I was 9, we moved to Richmond, Virginia, which is just south of Washington, D.C. And we were kind of on that notorious rain-snow line. We would get rain, sleet, snow, a mix. And I got really excited about trying to forecast the snow, watching all the television station meteorologists and making my own forecasts, and said, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to go on TV and I want to forecast and broadcast the weather.
Okay, so you've done this for 20 years. I believe you had a gap in between as well. I think it was a couple of years ago when you took a short break.
I've done lots of different things. So it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I did television for almost a decade straight. So I got my degree in meteorology from Penn State University, my Bachelor of Science degree. So go Nittany Lions, big Penn Stater here. And then I went up to upstate New York to Syracuse, and my first TV job was there. I was up there for 4 years, came down to the AccuWeather Network in Pennsylvania, did some national television for a little bit, and then came down to Norfolk, Virginia, where I am now. And I worked at the NBC affiliate television station there doing weather. After that, I did some different things. I was kind of at a place in my life where I said, I'm not sure I'm happy with this anymore. And I know a lot of people go through that and they're kind of at a crossroads in their life. So I left television weather because working in local news, you work weekends, you work holidays, you get up at 2 a.m. to do the morning news, or you're there until midnight if you're doing the evening news. So my husband and I rarely saw each other, and it just wasn't good for family life. So I decided to step away from TV, and I did a various amount of things. I worked as a media planner for a little while with the government. I decided then, well, all right, how about being a pharmaceutical sales representative? My dad's a pharmacist, retired, and I love talking with people. I love science. I love learning and interacting. So I did pharmaceutical sales for a bit. And then I said, well, I don't know if this is it either. So then I decided to be a college admissions advisor for a local college here in the Norfolk, Virginia area. Did that for a while. At the time, I decided to enter the Mrs. Virginia International pageant. Now, going back another 10 years, I had done pageants for 10 years. I started at Penn State when I was in college, and I never won. I would place, I would be second runner-up, first runner-up, but I hadn't won. So I was on that kick to say, all right, I'm going to accomplish this. So I kept doing pageants, and then in 2014, I said, all right, I'm doing Mrs. Virginia International. My platform was my passion, natural disaster preparedness, preparing people for weather. So kind of funny, it kind of comes full circle. I brought everything back to weather and preparing for disasters. And then I won. I was shocked that I finally won. Yeah, thank you. After 10 years, I got the crown, I got the sash, and I used it to my advantage. And I did over 100 appearances, not just in Virginia, but all across the United States, raising awareness about extreme weather events and natural disaster preparedness. And that's kind of, what brought me to where I am now, to eventually forming my own company, Prepare with Share, at preparewithshare.com. Getting back into television, I hosted a local lifestyle TV show on the CBS affiliate here in Norfolk, Virginia for over 5 years. That was part-time. But now I'm really focused on my own business, doing things that align with that as a natural disaster and travel preparedness expert. I love travel, so I've weaved that in there too. And then, of course, I still do some freelance television and teach for FEMA, but now it kind of all is in the same arena, if that makes sense.
Sure. So what was it like, to be that winner after 10 years? You've been at it for 10 years. What was that feeling?
Yeah, I shock. I couldn't believe it. I said, is this finally happening? It's something that you try and try and try. And I remember my poor grandmother, when she was alive, she had gone to several pageants, and one day she said, Cher, I just can't go anymore. It hurts my heart too much to see you lose. And so, I understand that. And my parents had supported me. And this pageant, my parents were out of town, so they weren't there. So only my sister and her husband and my husband, of course, were there. And they got to see me win. And of course, everybody else was going, we can't believe we missed it, because they'd gone to most of the other pageants. And then it finally happened. I mean, people say, oh, are they rigged? Is that why you don't win? And I just think there's a time and a place for everything. And for me, the word that my college advisor, who I'm still in touch with to this day, says to describe me is tenacious. He said, Cheryl, you do not give up. If you want something, you will keep going and going till you get it.
And this year, you were nominated for the Emmys.
Yes, I was. So this is my fourth time being nominated, and you're going to hear a very similar story here. So, the Emmy Awards and TV news. So, I still do enough in TV news where I can submit for the Emmys. Last year, I was fortunate enough to do a 3-month stint on air at Fox 5 in New York City. I lived and I worked in New York. I did the 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. newscast doing the weather, and I absolutely loved it. So I entered the Emmys and I got nominated in the weather anchor category. There were 4 of us nominated. I was the only female, which I was honored to see. And I thought, okay, my 4th nomination. It's my first nomination as a weather anchor. The other nominations were for weather reporter doing stories or as a TV host, which is great too. I thought this was my year. I went to New York. I went to the Marriott Marquis in Manhattan, got all dressed up, sparkly green dress, red carpet with my husband. It was a great time, but unfortunately I didn't win. But I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep trying because you know I don't give up.
That's awesome. I've got to say, Cheryl, you inspire me when you say that you never give up and that you're tenacious. You really inspire me. So, like you, I'm going to keep continuing what I'm doing and never, ever give up. In my eyes, you're a true winner. That's what I'd say.
You're so sweet. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It means a lot because, trust me, it's tough to keep going, to keep trying, to keep pushing when everybody sees you. I don't want to say fail, but it almost feels like a failure. But inside of me, there's something in here that says, Cheryl, you deserve this. You've worked hard and you're going to keep pushing till you get it. So, Shruti, I want you to do the same thing for yourself, for this podcast and for other goals that you have, is keep going.
So tell me, you said that you've had to, you feel like you failed. Firstly, why do you feel that way? And secondly, how do you deal and cope with that feeling?
It's tough. It's tough when you think, okay, I did absolutely everything I could, and I think this is my year. And then you don't win. So yeah, it feels like a failure. I mean, granted, I was nominated. A lot of people don't get nominated. So that is a huge achievement in itself. But I've always been a perfectionist, an overachiever. I've also been towards the top of my class in high school in the honor society. So I'm not accustomed to, I don't know. You get what I'm saying though? It's hard. It's just, I want it, I fight for it, I do what I can. And I don't want to call myself a failure because I know I'm not a failure, but sometimes human nature, it's tough to swallow.
Now, I'm going to go into all the wonderful stuff you do to get people prepared for whatever happens in the US, whether it's, the hurricanes or anything really, because let's talk about this year. This year's been insane. We got stuck in Kenya in April when we were meant to leave because my son, just after the wedding, which you were taking some beautiful photos with him, he fell sick and was admitted in hospital.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he got appendicitis. We did not operate him and decided to come back to Australia. And we were trying to get out and Dubai got flooded. So we never left. We had to go back home, unfortunately, and it was just a mess, to be honest. We only spent 3 days at home. So essentially, I've promised my mother that I am going back next year. Let's see how that goes. But what I wanted to know from you is, how do you prepare them for what is about to come in the US? Because you guys have a lot of hurricanes and tornadoes, for example.
Oh, yes. We've got some of the most tornadoes that occur on the planet right here in the United States, and the hurricanes. It's been a very active season. It's scary because as the climate continues to change, extreme weather events are on the rise. There's more moisture available in the atmosphere to work with. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. And so we're seeing that in heavy rainfall. We're seeing that in more flooding, more intense hurricanes, more fuel for the fire, so to speak, more violent storms, the tornadoes. And it's something that all 50 states in the US are prone to. Nobody is not prone to a disaster. It can happen anywhere, anytime. I mean, whether it be one of those that I mentioned or wildfires or earthquakes. And I mean, you're not a stranger to it with what happens in Australia as well. Natural disasters can occur anywhere in this world. And it's one of those things where we've got to take off our goggles or our tunnel vision and we have to start looking at the big picture and say, okay, that doesn't just happen to people we see on TV. It could happen anywhere. It could happen to us. It could happen to our loved ones, to our best friends, our pets. And we have to start to realize that and take some accountability and personal responsibility.
Right. Now, how do individuals prepare themselves financially for situations like these?
Financial preparation can be tough because a lot of us sometimes are living paycheck to paycheck and we don't have that safety net. And this is where you have to maybe give up things that you like but don't need. For example, that cup of coffee, fancy coffee that you go and buy every day. Maybe instead of doing that one day, take that few dollars, you take that money and just put it aside in a jar or in a bank account and just start accumulating an emergency fund. I mean, that's an easy way to start doing it. I think another way to do it is just kind of make an activity for the kids and say, all right, how about this week or this month, we buy this item for our emergency kit. Next month, we buy this item. And we start building it little by little until it starts to add up. But there are ways to do it, but you just have to be, you got to think about it more when you're going about your daily lives. You have to budget. You can't just spend. And you have to have that fund because trust me, if you don't have it, you're going to wish you did when that disaster strikes.
In your experience, what are the most common mistakes individuals make when it comes to planning for emergencies?
I think a lot of people fail to prepare for disasters because they don't think it's going to happen to them. They think, I've been here for 40 years. I've never gone through anything like that. It's not going to happen to me. Or if it does, it's my time to go. I hear that from some people. I also think people don't prepare because they're too busy. They're running around in their daily lives. They've got the tasks to do. They've got the work. They've got the home chores. They've got the children to care for. You've got all these things going on, dinner to make, laundry to do. There's just all these daily things, dishes to clean that have to get done that you're just trying to get by day by day. So people think, I'll deal with that when it happens. So I think those are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to preparation is they don't think it's going to happen to them. They're too busy to prepare, or some of them might just not care, or maybe they don't have the means to prepare because we also have to address our special needs population. People with disabilities, maybe they're unable to prepare. Maybe some people don't know how to prepare. They don't know what to do. And that's why education is so important. And language barriers, that's another hurdle we have to cross. Are we getting this information to people in different languages so everybody can understand and know what to do and where to go?
I find that there are a number of financial differences from the United States versus Australia, for example. In Australia, individuals do get a minimum wage, whereas in the United States, there's no concept, I don't think, of minimum wage. It's more a case of, there's some people who live off the tips that they get in restaurants and bars and stuff. How can these individuals prepare for natural disasters, do you think? And the reason I ask this is because in Australia, we're very big on having an emergency fund, very big on having medical health insurance as well, travel insurance. So that helps us a lot. But that's because I think the financial circumstances are quite different.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up with minimum wage. Now, there is a minimum wage in the United States. However, as you mentioned, some people who work at restaurants as waitstaff, they may get less than that. They don't get that given minimum wage for that state per se. I know California has a higher wage than a lot of other states, so a lot of it really depends. But yeah, that can be an issue. If you're at a restaurant where you don't get big tips and you're just surviving on small tips, that can certainly be tough. And granted, you get to pick and choose, where you apply to work, but you can't always get that job at that top paying restaurant, for example. So for them, I think I would do the same thing. And maybe too, you could use a buddy system. Whereas if you don't have a family yet, let's say that you're young, maybe you're in school, or maybe you just have friends, you guys could kind of come together and say, all right, if there's a disaster, how about I buy this, you buy this, and this person buys that, and we can all stay together at one person's house or all evacuate in this person's car. But I think you have to look at your community, your neighbors, your family, friends, coworkers right there first, and to start talking about it. Make that plan, have that conversation, because a lot of people don't. It's kind of like a taboo topic where a lot of people don't want to talk about or think about death, which is inevitable. I don't like talking about it either, but it's one of those things where at some point you're gonna have to talk about it.
I really like that advice. I think more and more people should take it on. It's just very necessary to have these conversations within the community and neighbors too, to be able to prepare for such situations. So thanks for that tip, Cheryl. I'll keep that in mind for here if it ever comes up. But how important is insurance when it comes to preparedness of natural disasters? So when we think of insurance, I'm talking about medical insurance, life insurance, health insurance, anything, travel insurance.
Yes, insurance is critical when it comes to natural disasters. Home insurance, renter's insurance, you gotta do it. You gotta have it. And then there's things on top of that. In the US, for example, there is earthquake insurance, there's flood insurance. Those are separate policies than your homeowner's insurance. So a lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, I've got homeowner's insurance. If I have a flood from water coming in from the ground, it'll be covered. Well, nope, that's not the case. That's flood insurance. And people say, I don't live in a flood zone, I don't need it. Well, you have to look back at recent hurricanes here in the United States where you have so much rain falling in such a short amount of time. It doesn't matter if you're in a flood zone or not, a FEMA designated flood zone, because just about any area can flood, unless you're on the top of a big hill or something. But people have to realize that. So home insurance, critical. Consider that. The flood, not everybody needs earthquake insurance, but if you're in one of those zones where you have that hazard, that risk, that's something to think about. Medical insurance, of course, so important. That's something that I recommend that everybody has as well. And I know there's a price with it. You also have to have auto insurance. That's another thing. And then travel insurance. So many people, at least in the US, don't even consider getting travel insurance when they go abroad. I always do. I've used it, and I'm happy that I had it.
So I believe when you were traveling from Zanzibar to Mombasa, you had a need for your travel insurance, but there was an issue with that?
Oh my gosh, yes. So we were in Zanzibar doing some sightseeing, my husband and I, and we had bought a ticket. It was a small airline, small carrier there. It was supposed to go direct from Zanzibar to Mombasa. So the day prior to our flight, I get an email saying, oh, that flight's been canceled, and we're going to book you on another one. I think it was 2 days later or something crazy. And I go, I don't have 2 days later. No, because at that point, we had tours to get to, we had things to do. And so I think that was when I was also trying to get to the wedding. I was trying to get to a wedding there. And so what I did was I thought, okay, how can I do this? And I started getting on my phone, Googled flights, how can I get to Mombasa from Zanzibar? And I found a flight, I think it was on Kenya Airways. It went through Nairobi and then Nairobi back down to Mombasa. It was the same day as our original flight. And I said, all right, let's do it. So I just bought those 2 tickets for my husband and me. And then I contacted the travel insurance, submitted the receipts, and they ended up reimbursing me, which was amazing. So still made it there. I don't even think there was much of a delay, maybe a couple hour delay, but nothing huge. And I'm so glad that I jumped into action and I didn't panic. And I would say that's my number one rule when you're traveling. If a mishap happens like that, don't panic, don't get upset, just immediately go into troubleshooting mode. try to solve it yourself. Don't rely on somebody else to do it. Because if I just relied on that airline, I would have been sitting there for a couple extra days. So instead, I went out on my own, I did my research, figured out a plan, put it into action, and we got where we needed to be.
Good on you.
Thank you.
I relied on my travel insurance, and I left them to book the tickets, and they delayed by 3 days. And I'd love to thank them, because that delay actually saved me the stuff that happened in Dubai, because Dubai was shut and they didn't have food for 3 days. So that actually saved me all that trouble. So on this occasion, I can thank them that happened. It's just really funny.
Yeah, it's so scary what you went through though, and with your son, and he's okay, right?
He's okay. So we still have our ups and downs, and it's once a month that I have to keep an eye on him. He's always ill once a month, but otherwise it's okay. And he's getting out of it. He's in school now. It was more so, I think, the climate change. And Mombasa was really humid.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it all caught up with him. And in the end, we got back home and we were happy. But we were away for 2 months, and he was very clear he's never traveling again for 2 months.
No, the poor thing. It's interesting, though, what you say about weather and different climates in different parts of the world. Because you're right, a lot of people might not be accustomed to that type of temperature, and humidity is the thing. If you're not used to the humidity, heat exhaustion becomes a real possibility and a real danger for people. So that's something to always think about too when traveling to different parts in the world, is you have to do your research about the weather and the climate.
Yeah, and even though people think, oh, it's just humidity, we have humid weather here, we have humid weather there, know that the humidity in every country is different.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
This is something that we've experienced. So we get humid weather in Australia. Like today, it is humid, it's really hot, but we can deal with it. And it's a different humid from what was there in Mombasa.
It's very interesting how it works. Just different climate regions in the world, and adapting to that. And we have to adapt quickly when we're traveling.
Yeah. Cheryl, just going back, how do people plan for, and since we're talking about this in a sense, how do people plan for unforeseen events? Like in my case, my unforeseen event was my son ending up in hospital.
Yeah, I think, gosh, there's another one, and this is another flight story, actually, with my husband and me. This was one where I had a action-packed itinerary. We were doing this trip to Europe, and we were going country hopping from one to another, and I had tours booked and everything lined up. And it's always good to have a backup plan when you're trying to prepare for unforeseen events, but sometimes you can't have a backup plan, or you don't know, because you don't know what's going to happen or what's going to go wrong. So again, don't panic and jump into that mode where you start troubleshooting to get where you want to be. So for this one, we were trying to get from Edinburgh to Budapest with a layover in Amsterdam. Flight was delayed into Amsterdam. We would have missed that flight to Budapest and been stuck in Amsterdam for the night, missing our tour in Budapest, and essentially messing up our whole trip, because then we were going to catch the train from there. So instead, I looked at the airport monitors and I said, okay, what other flights are leaving here this evening from Edinburgh? And I looked at them all. I'm like, all right, which of these might have a connecting flight to Budapest? And I started Googling. And then I found one on Lufthansa Airways, and I went right up to the counter. It was a KLM counter where I had the tickets. I said, all right, look, we're on this delayed flight. I see you want to put me on this other flight that's not going to get me to my destination tonight, which is Budapest. Put me on this flight through Frankfurt on Lufthansa to get to Budapest tonight, please. And they did. And we got there. And it was amazing. We had to run, but we made it, and our luggage made it, and it was great. So you have to be your own advocate. I know in your case, you had the travel agency help you, and in your case, it worked out. But for me, a lot of the times when time is of the essence, you have to be your own advocate. You have to work for yourself and troubleshoot. You can't rely on others to do what sometimes is best, because I'm sure that airline very well wanted to keep us on that airline so they wouldn't have to buy new tickets on a different one. But in this case, it worked out.
What productivity techniques would you suggest for people who are overwhelmed by or planning for unforeseen events?
I would tell people planning or worried about unforeseen events to, I guess, make a list of things. Be productive, have your itinerary there, have all the important phone numbers, know addresses of where you're going, make sure people know where you're going. That way you have everything right in front of you and you can't panic. So being productive and being organized is so key. And that way you can pivot more easily, especially, if you get sick. My gosh, that's another thing I do. I always have a mini disaster medical kit with me when I travel. I put in all the cold medication, headache medication, extra tissues, cough drops, or whatever you might end up needing. I bring a digital thermometer with me to see if I get a fever somewhere. Just ointment, band-aids, just anything that you might need. I pack it. Mouthwash while you're traveling, just all that stuff. So if you get stuck somewhere, always an extra pair of underwear too. That's a good tip to have. But just have all that stuff with you, so that way if something does happen and you get stuck, at least you have the bare necessities to help you get by.
And would you advise people to keep these in their hand luggage or in their packed luggage?
Hand luggage, absolutely, 100%. I always keep small, because I know there's a liquid rule in a lot of places, small items. I know in the US it's 3.4 ounces or less, but keep that in your hand luggage for sure, 100%. Again, as I said, I will always travel with a sleep shirt or something I can sleep in, extra pair of socks, underwear, a change of clothes if I can fit it in for the next day. Make sure you have the shoes that you want to use for the next day too. And then any toiletries and medications that you need. Oh my goodness. Medications should always go in your hand luggage. Any jewelry or anything that's expensive, passport, obviously cash, anything like that, keep with you at all times.
What tools or resources do you find most useful or helpful when you're looking to stay organized?
I love using, actually, I've got it right here, my personal planner. So this is a little booklet that I carry with me everywhere. It fits in my purse and I keep track with a pencil. I write down all my appointments. I've got important phone numbers in there, anything that I might need. And yes, people say, oh, well, you have a phone for that. Why don't you keep it in your phone? Yes, I've got an electronic calendar too, but for me, it helps me stay organized when I can open up a little book and see everything right in front of me. I can write it in with pencil, and that kind of ingrains it in my mind more. Call it old school, but it's something that I've done now for years, and I refuse to give it up, as this really helps me stay on track.
How can developing a mindset of preparedness help with personal growth?
It's huge to have that mindset for personal growth. Gosh, to be prepared and be ready for anything. I think it goes back to not being reactive in events that are unforeseen or disasters. Many of us just want to get angry. We want to get upset. We want to cry. We want to yell. We want to react in a way that just gets the emotions out. But you really have to have that sense of just take a moment and just go, okay. It's kind of like when a team loses a sporting event that you were rooting for and you just want to get really upset. But then you go, okay, no, just take that moment, be mature, think about it, sit with it, and then react in a more respectable, mature way. That really helps personal growth. It doesn't happen overnight. That takes years. Now I know why people like my late grandmother, she was so wise. She had so much personal growth, but it's because experience really does make you better. As you live through things and you work through hardships, you really know how to be even keeled about it. I mean, at least with her, not everybody's like that, but with her, she wasn't reactive. She just kind of went with the flow, and that's how I still strive to be.
I've got to second that. I've seen you in your element. You just go with the flow. Nothing phases you. And I remember, like, we were talking during the wedding. I don't even know who Cheryl is. And we're just having this amazing chat about We were gossiping about my brother and how naughty he was when he was
That's
younger.
right. Yes, that was so fun.
And then I find out that I've been telling Cheryl all these things from her Instagram. I'm like, oh no, my brother's going to kill me.
You're totally fine. I didn't repeat it. I didn't repeat it.
So, Cheryl, tell me about habits. What habits do you think are necessary to cultivate resilience in the face of challenges?
I think when you're facing a challenge, what you want to do is, and this goes back to not being reactive, to really understanding the situation, and and then preparation comes into it too. I think the more prepared your mind, the better able that you're going to be able to take on whatever comes and overcome that challenge. It's one of those things with me. It's tenacity. Being resilient. You just bounce back. You can't let it knock you down. It might knock you down a little bit temporarily, which happens to me when I lose an Emmy. Or I shouldn't say lose an Emmy. I should say when I don't win an Emmy. But yeah, I'll get knocked down a little bit, and then I'll say, okay, brush it off. Let's get back up. Let's try again. Let's keep doing this. You have to keep a positive attitude about it, and also try not to take life so seriously. It's just one of those things where, and I hate to say it, nobody gets out alive, which is sad, but it's true. So little things, try not to let them get you so upset. Or if something bad happens, yeah, you're allowed to take those moments to be upset, to let the emotions out, to cry, as long as you know you're going to come out on the other side stronger. And I think that really, that's one thing my grandma went through, is she went through a lot in her life. And that's probably why I thought she was so wise, because she went through stuff, but she kept getting back up and getting stronger each time.
Is there anything you can share in terms of, you've mentioned a couple of times now that your grandmother went through so much, and yet she's always bounced back and she was always resilient. She was wise. Any stories you want to share with us?
Yeah, I think my grandmother, she was working when she got out of high school. She went to college in Boston, and then she had 5 children, just one after another, and she gave up her career. And she said, this is how it is. And I know a lot of the times my grandfather, he was in the military, he was gone a lot, he was traveling. There were some scary times. I know polio, I think he might have gotten polio at one point, so just all this disease. And then she was going through World War II. I mean, that was going on, and just raising all these children on her own. And I think that alone, going through that time period in the US, was so much. And for her to come out as strong and resilient as she was, and I know a lot of people share her story, and we don't hear that as much anymore, because I feel like today a lot of us we're so ingrained in our phones, and we're not doing the things that maybe our ancestors went through. But my grandma really was a true hero, and I always talked about that throughout my years in pageantry when they asked about my hero. And I think what she went through and everything she did during that time period is incredible.
So tell me about you've been doing this for a very long time. You've been in this, prepare for hurricane season. And I see your feeds on Instagram as well, that you are encouraging people to prepare for it before they arrive. Tell me about the differences year on year. Have you noticed that they're progressively getting worse, the hurricanes and the tornadoes? And
it's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because when you look at it, and obviously year to year, there's going to be some ebbs and flows. There are overall patterns, El Nino, La Nina, and they influence hurricane season. But when you look at it, even over the past 25 years, for example, we are seeing more of these extreme events. We're seeing stronger hurricanes. The fact that a lot of these now getting up to Category 5 strength, some of the earliest hurricanes on record, we're seeing now in the months of June, for example, some of the strongest hurricanes, rather, in the month of June. It's just, the ocean is so warm. The Gulf of Mexico has been so warm. And it's just all the perfect ingredients to get these storms. You need warm water, you need moisture, you need some wind shear, so winds coming in at different directions at different speeds. You got to have all that, the instability, and that's fueling all these things. And the same thing holds true for tornadoes, for example. You got to have that clash of air masses, the breeding ground, which in the US, we get so many tornadoes because you have cold, dry air coming in from Canada, warm, moist air coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. When they clash, that is that breeding ground for all those ingredients to come together to get supercell thunderstorms, which sometimes can drop those tornadoes. So I think this is a growing problem. We're seeing Tornado Alley, quote, that has traditionally been in the plain states in the US, shifting a little bit farther east into the southeastern portion of the country. So now we're seeing more tornadoes there. We're seeing random tornadoes in places like New Hampshire, up in the northeastern part of the country, who aren't accustomed to seeing very many tornadoes. So that's another thing that's happening, is people who thought they didn't have to worry about it are getting a wake-up call.
How do you teach these people, or what is the continuous learning process for these individuals in order to prepare, for disasters like this? I mean, they're new to this, some of them. They're living in those states where they never imagined these things could happen.
Yeah, it's always been a possibility, but maybe a slim possibility, that you could get a tornado, for example, in New England in the U.S. But now we are seeing more of these happening. We're seeing stronger tornadoes happening. We're seeing more flooding events. So when it comes to being prepared, it comes to having a plan, a family communicated plan, which means talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, make sure everybody's on that same page. Obviously, knowing your risk, know what weather, natural hazards you're at risk for where you live, and also where you travel, because that's another thing you have to consider. And then finally, build that emergency preparedness kit. Have that kit with you at home, have one at work, have one in your vehicle, because you never know when disaster might strike.
Have you had a situation where these individuals are new to this and they're now having to learn everything that they never thought they would experience? And how fast does their learning curve need to be in such situations?
Well, I think that it's not like it went from, 0 to 100 overnight. That risk was always there. It's just now I think it's becoming more prominent, because we're hearing more about it on the news. We're hearing more about it on social media. And yes, these storms are getting stronger, more intense. We're seeing more of them. So now I think it's more important than ever to be prepared. But it's something that people should always have had in the back of their mind. It's something that in school we grow up knowing, hey, these are weather hazards. These are the things that can happen here in the United States. We should be prepared for them. A lot of people, just again, for the reasons we discussed earlier, they're too busy. They don't think it's going to happen to them. Just kind of push it to the side and they don't think about it. But now they really should start thinking about it. And I don't think it's much of a learning curve. I think there's a lot of resources out there. For example, on my website, preparewithshare.com, I've got a link that has a disaster kit checklist. It tells you what you need. It also tells you some important things that you should do before a disaster strikes. Now, you don't always have notice. Hurricanes, yes, you can see coming. Winter storms, you can see coming. Tornadoes, the average warning lead time is usually about 13 minutes, more or less, in the United States. However, you can prepare for a big tornado outbreak well in advance. So those are things that we can all do right now. We can all make a list of important phone numbers. If the power and internet goes out and we can't look up the number to call the power company or your electric or gas company, how are you going to do that? Well, if you write down those numbers, write down important family member, friends numbers, insurance, have all that down on paper. And then I say too, make copies of all your important documents. If you can't access them or you can't get to them, keep copies on a flash drive and in the cloud. We all have that now with technology. There's so many simple things that you could do, but people just, I don't want to say prefer to, but a lot of people wait until the last minute.
So if people have a choice, they'd rather do ignorance than preparation.
I don't think they necessarily choose to consciously, but subconsciously, they probably do.
What role does self-care play in disaster preparedness?
Self-care is huge. The mental aspect of it that a lot of people don't talk about, but following disasters, the mental fatigue and the PTSD that can happen, and not just for people who go through it, but also for the first responders, for the search and rescue, relief efforts. Everybody goes in and you see that it's like a culture shock, seeing devastation. We saw that in Asheville, North Carolina, after recent hurricanes there flooded the area. Nobody ever thought that could happen. That was a 1 in 1,000 year flood event, just completely wiped out that town. But people have to be, you have to be prepared mentally. You've got to be prepared physically too. It comes with eating healthy, getting your exercise, being mentally ready for something like that. I always recommend talking to a family or friend who you trust, or a counselor who you trust, but having that outlet there. In the United States, they have phone numbers you can call and get help. You can talk to somebody if you're struggling. People need to know those numbers and utilize that. I think all of that is really important.
How can travelers effectively plan for potential disruptions when it comes to natural disasters? I had one. I openly say that. We had one in April. And in a sense, I don't know, like, I'm lucky I had the insurances, but I don't know how prepared I was when you talk about the emergency kits.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to prepare for natural disasters when you're traveling. I think a lot of it goes into knowing the risk where you're going. Know, okay, what are the natural hazard risks or other risks in general in this country that you're traveling to? And in the United States, we have NOAA weather radios, which I don't know if you have them in Australia or not, but NOAA weather radios, it's on a separate frequency. They have portable ones you can carry around, and you'll get all different types of watches and warnings from the National Weather Service. So if you're out and about, you'll have one of those and you'll get that notification, because we can't always rely on cell phones to get those types of notifications. Cell phones can get bogged down. They might not work. The batteries could die. Different things could happen. So know where you're going. And then once you get there, a lot of places have evacuation signs, hurricane evacuation route or tsunami evacuation route. Pay attention to those signs and ask locals. Talk to locals, the hotel staff. If you're staying at a hotel, ask them, hey, how do we get notifications if there's a tsunami warning? Where do we go? Where is the highest place? What should we do? Fire exits. Most hotels have those little maps on the back of the door that says, okay, this is your fire escape route. Look at that when you get to the hotel. Get a plan for those types of disasters. But when a lot of us travel, we're in vacation mode. We've got our blinders on, our tunnel vision. We're happy. We're enjoying our time. We're not thinking about natural disasters. That is when we're most vulnerable.
After the tsunami that occurred, I think it was in Thailand and Maldives, and it went all around. It was quite a huge one. I've always taken the opportunity whenever I go to any hotel to look at the fire exits, to look at what, the exits are. And it's only after that incident that I've made it a point that I need to look everywhere for it and know what my exits are.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Situational awareness saves lives. Pay attention when you go anywhere new. Count how many doors you would have to go past to get to the stairwell in your hotel, for example, because you might not be able to see. If there's smoke, know where you're going. Look around when you're walking around a new area. If you're eating dinner outside, look at your surroundings. If you're in a restaurant, I always like to face the door so I know and I can see what's coming. But situational awareness is so important. You can't just be in your little oasis thinking about that when you're out in a public place. Now, if you're lounging by a pool in a secure area, okay, that might be a little different. However, as we saw in Kenya, the monkeys can easily steal items from you when you're relaxing. So that's something else to watch out for.
Yes, I almost got my ring stolen by these little buggers, as we call them. Now, what misconceptions do people have about travel preparedness, or about travel safety and the preparedness of it?
I think a lot of people, especially here in America, they assume that everybody knows English or that they will be happy to speak English. And granted, I will say in a lot of countries I've traveled to, people have been very nice and they have spoken English to us, which is great. And I wish I were bilingual. I wish I knew more languages. And I try, and I always tell people, hey, when you go to new countries, do your best to fit in with the culture. In Kenya, it was jumbo, so you do your best to show, hey, I respect your culture. I'm trying to learn some of the language, even some of the basic words and greetings. Try to do that. Those are some simple things that you can do. And the other part of your question, you were asking about staying safe, right, when traveling? So staying safe when traveling, and this is important too, especially if you're a woman and you're going to a place maybe alone or with other women, you have to make sure if you're staying in a hotel, Airbnb, home share, what have you, make sure it's secure. Make sure you have your privacy. Look around for hidden cameras, open drawers. Make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be in there. Also, map out the area where you're staying in advance. Don't rely on your phone for maps. Pick up a paper map too, so you know where to go if your GPS signal stops working. Have important phone numbers. Talk to the hotel staff. They usually will be able to tell you, hey, this is safe, this is not safe, this is what you should look out for. They're really good about that. And again, always have that situational awareness when you're going around a local area. And be careful of trusting people who you don't know because they could look at you as an easy target. And sometimes you just want to be nice to everybody, which I always want to be nice to people. But at the same time, sometimes you have to say a firm, no, thank you, not interested, and keep going.
Have you heard of a lot of situations where individuals have trusted other individuals and things have gone wrong? Or, cameras, you mentioned particularly cameras in Airbnbs and everything. I take that very seriously because there have been incidences which you see on TV, but you never think it's going to happen to you.
Oh, right. I know. No, you just don't think it's going to happen, but it can happen. It hasn't happened to me personally that I know of anyway, but just better to be safe than sorry and look around, look for anything unusual. And I did have an Uber driver once. Uber like a taxi. So they will drive you around and, you pay them to take you to a certain place. Well, I had this one guy one time who took me on a joyride. And it got to the point where I knew I was off the beaten path. I could look at the map on my phone and say, okay, this is not good. I didn't know if he was trying to take me somewhere creepy or if he was just trying to run up my bill so I would pay more money. But it was taking so long that even Uber texted me and said, hey, you're outside of your route. Is everything okay? And so I was able to message back to Uber. And then I also started texting my friends, said, hey, look, this is where I am. Here's a screenshot. This is the Uber driver. I sent the information to my friends so they would know exactly where I am. And eventually the Uber driver, eventually got back to where I was going. And I just said, hey, just let me out here. We're good. I'm out of here. And it was very uncomfortable. And I don't know if maybe he got wind from Uber that, hey, you're off track. And then maybe that's why he brought me to where I was going. But I was by myself and it was scary when you're in a stranger's car and they could really take you anywhere.
Yeah. Did you ever find out the reason as to why that happened, or was he being creepy? Or
he seemed creepy, but no, I don't know the reason. I reported it to Uber, but I never heard anything after that.
How do you stay positive and motivated when you hear of, or when you're working in such environments where hurricanes are happening and people are panicking? At the end of the day, you are this sort of leader in the advice that you give, and you've got to stay so positive. I'll give you an example. In Australia, we've had a number of floods, and you hear about communities and you hear about people who take advice from the right people but then don't follow it, and unfortunately they don't make it. And at that time, particularly for these people who are doing emergency work, they are so devastated. So how do you remain positive and motivated when you hear about devastated stories or devastating stories?
Oh, it's hard. It's really hard to stay positive, especially after hearing about some of the devastation from recent hurricanes. You hear about that in the news. We go there. I went down to Florida and I saw some of the devastation and destruction that had been there for years from Hurricane Ian back in 2022. And we interviewed a family, and the family got teary-eyed when they were telling the story. And it's almost like a doctor has to separate their life, and when they're talking to family members about a very sick person, you have to keep that professional hat on, and you have to compartmentalize and separate that, and try to stay professional and try to stay positive, and just know that you are making a difference by going in there and telling their story, because it might help somebody else someday. And you're also going in there with empathy, and you're lending your support. And that's what I always try to do too, is show them empathy and show them that I care. And that's why we do the job we do. That's why meteorologists go on TV, and that's why we forecast and help alert people and prepare people for storms, because it is our number one priority to save lives and property.
So how do you deal with that, in the sense that you've seen a natural disaster occur, people have lost their lives, you hear about these stories? How do you deal with, it can be terrible. People are talking about death. In some instances, it actually giving you graphic details of what has happened. How do you tend to speak to other people? Do you tend to take counseling? Would you recommend it? How do you deal with it?
Talking to people is one of the most helpful things for me. I had a really hard time after the recent hurricanes, after Helene and after Hurricane Milton here in the United States. I talked to my husband about it. I said, I can't stand seeing all this devastation. This is what I do. It's my job to prepare people so they're ready for this, and so bad things don't happen. And then we can't protect everybody. Sometimes bad things do happen, and it's hard not to take it to heart. And I do talk to a therapist as well. And I went to her and said, hey, help me through this. And it's one of those things where she says, look, you're doing everything you can. You can't put blame on yourself. You can't save the world, but you can continue doing what you're doing and getting out there and educating people on how to prepare and the things they should do, and being there for those who have gone through it. Do what you can to help, and then just try to take it one day at a time. You can't expect to turn the page and go from 0 to 100 and be back to normal. No, it takes time to get back to that point.
And it's very important, you mentioned therapy. It's very important for people to know that it is okay to go to therapy. It is okay to seek help. A lot of people tend to ignore it by thinking, oh, this happened, I'm just going to get over it. It's not necessary that you get over it as quick as you want. Or sometimes you just sort of keep your pain or everything so bottled up. And what you do is you're just putting one brick over the other. And it's not healing anything. It's actually making it worse in the long term.
Oh, it is. And there is that stigma. The stigma is still there about therapy, about talking to somebody about your problems and not wanting to deal with it. And it's easier to just keep it inside and push it there and pretend it doesn't exist. But I've gotten over that stigma. I think a long time ago, I used to think that, no, I don't want to tell a stranger my problems. Well, that's what they're trained for. They're there to listen. They're there to help you. They're professional. They know what to do and how to help you cope and how to help you get past certain events. So for people who don't want to do it, I would just say, why? Because you can talk to your friends, but at some point, your friends are just going to say, okay, look, I've helped you all I can. At this point, you really got to talk to a professional who knows what to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's so many people in this world who talk to counselors and therapists, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's mental health. Mental health is as important as physical health. And it's great that so many health insurances now, they do have that benefit. Mental health in the US, it's there. You have counselors and therapists to use, to go to, and it's wonderful that they're available, and we should all take advantage of that.
Definitely, I totally agree with that. Now, what advice would you have for individuals who want to join this field of emergency management and preparedness?
For anybody looking to get into emergency management, even weather and preparedness, for one, I would say don't expect to get rich because a lot of us starting out in the industry are not paid very much. And eventually you can get to a comfortable level. But think about that. Also, you got to have a strong head on your shoulders. You got to be able to take criticism. You got to be able to have minor failures, for example. You can't always be right. As a meteorologist doing weather forecasting, it's an inexact science. You can't be right all the time. And you can be right often, but we are predicting the future. And that's a really tough thing to do. So you're going to see some things that might make you uncomfortable in emergency management. You're going to see the impacts of disasters. You're going to see devastation, destruction. You're going to see people hurting. And you might be there to try to help them, to rescue them, to help them cope, to listen. It's all that you really have to be prepared for. It's almost like how they say a hairstylist is sometimes like a psychologist because they have to listen to all your problems when you're getting your hair done. Same goes for us, meteorologists or emergency managers or first responders out in the field. A lot of the times, we're going to be listening to people and helping them and doing what we can to help them cope. So you've got to be ready for that too. But at the same time, it's also very rewarding because this is an ever-growing industry. We're seeing more weather disasters because the climate is changing. And so there is opportunity there, for growth, for us to network and to go to conferences around the world and to learn more. The data is constantly changing. Technology is constantly getting better. And so we're getting smarter at knowing how to handle these things. We can look at building stronger, coming together as communities. And those are a lot of positives that come with it.
Right now, you've opened Prepare with Share, which is your organization. Tell us exactly what Prepare with Share does, other than provide information, tools, and resources. And I truly believe that people should be either connected to you on Instagram or, subscribe to your subscribe on your website so they're aware of what is going on. But tell me about what else you do.
Thank you. Yeah, so my website, preparewithshare.com, also Prepare with Share on social media. I've got, I think, a bigger following right now, Cheryl Nelson TV on social media. I think my Instagram is probably the most popular at the moment. But what I do at Prepare with Share, yes, I not only provide information to educate people, but I do freelance TV work. I work for companies as a brand spokesperson or a product spokesperson in the arenas of natural disaster and travel preparedness. So that could be anything from if your product or brand has to do with different types of storms, or maybe outdoor events, or maybe anything to do with travel, whether it be automobiles or air travel. But there's a lot of different products and brands that go along with that, even down to home and family preparedness. So if you're traveling and you get sick, that's another way or another avenue you could look at that. So that's one of the big things I do as a spokesperson, and I work with production companies to make videos, really any type of videos that these companies want, whether it be for their website or social media accounts, or even getting on different local news TV stations across the country. I work with my talent manager to do that too. Another thing I do is speaking engagements. I do a lot of keynote talks, and I travel around the country doing that, and I'll talk about any different type of preparedness. So whether it be for hurricanes, to floods, the tornadoes, to climate adaptation, to wildfires and earthquakes, just anything that you could think of, winter storms, I'll go and I'll talk about that and we'll have a discussion about, hey, this is what you need to do. This is what causes these types of natural disasters. Explain the science of it a little bit, and then go through a disaster kit too, so people know exactly what they should have.
That's awesome. I'm going to leave your links on my YouTube so people can connect with you. And thanks for mentioning the resources that you have on the sheet that you've sent me as well. I'm going to also quote those resources for individuals who need to know any information. And
Yeah.
yes, your Instagram, Cheryl Nelson TV, seems to be on fire all the time. So people can connect with you on there as well as Prepare with Share.
Yes, thank you, Shruti. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Look, Cheryl, thanks for your time. We've gone above the hour that we had planned, and it's been a great conversation. I've learned a lot from you, and the first thing on my next travels is definitely going to be carrying cash with me when I go on my
Mhm.
travel, even just a little bit, because this is something I found that I needed and I didn't have enough of in my last trip. And then preparing the emergency kit, which is very important. And when I get there, make sure I know all my exits, all my entrances, the quick way in, quick way out, speak to the receptionist, and enjoy myself on the trip. Hope nothing goes
Yes,
wrong.
exactly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thanks for your time.